American troops using a newly developed acoustic locator mounted on a wheeled platform. The large horns amplified distant sounds, monitored through headphones worn by a crew member who could direct the platform to move and pinpoint distant enemy aircraft. Development of passive acoustic location accelerated during World War I, later surpassed by the development of radar in the 1940s. World War I was one of the defining events of the 20th century. From 1914 to 1918, conflict raged in much of the world and involved most of Europe, the United States, and much of the Middle East. An Austrian armored train in Galicia, circa 1915. Adding armor to trains dates back to the American Civil War, used as a way to safely move weapons and personnel through hostile territory. In terms of technological history, World War I is significant because it marked the debut of many new types of weapons and was the first major war to benefit from technological advances in radio, electrical power, and other technologies. From the onset, those involved in the war were aware that technology would make a critical impact on the outcome. The interior of an armored train car, Choplino, Dnipropetrovska Oblast, Ukraine, in the spring of 1918. At least 9 heavy machine guns are visible, as well as many ammunition cases. In 1915, British Admiral Jackie Fisher wrote, "The war is going to be won by inventions, new weapons, such as tanks, the Zeppelin, poison gas, the airplane, the submarine, and the machine gun, increased casualties, and brought the war to civilian populations." A German communications squad behind the Western Front, setting up using a tandem bicycle power generator to power a light radio station in September of 1917. The Germans shelled Paris with long-range, 60 miles or 100 kilometers, guns. London was bombed from the air for the first time by Zeppelins. An Austrian armored train in Galicia, circa 1915. Allied advance on Bapaume, France, circa 1917. 2 tanks are moving towards the left, followed by troops. In the foreground, some soldiers are sitting and standing at the roadside. One of them appears to be having a drink. Beside the men is what appears to be a rough wooden cross with an Australian or New Zealand service hat on it. In the background, other troops are advancing, moving field guns and mortars. Adding armor to trains dates back to the American Civil War, used as a way to safely move weapons and personnel through hostile territory. World War I was also the first major war that was able to draw upon electrical technologies that had been in development at the turn of the century. Soldier on a U.S. Harley-Davidson motorcycle, circa 1918. During the last years of the war, the United States deployed more than 20,000 Indian and Harley-Davidson motorcycles overseas. Radio, for example, became essential for communications. The most important advance in radio was the transmission of voice rather than code, something the electron tube, as oscillator and amplifier, made possible. British medium Mark A Whippet tanks advance past the body of a dead soldier, moving to an attack along a road near Echayat-la-Petite, France, on August 22, 1918. The Whippets were faster and lighter than previously deployed British heavy tanks. Electricity also made a huge impact on the war battleships. For example, might have electric signaling lamps, an electric helm indicator, electric fire alarms, remote control from the bridge of bulkhead doors, electrically controlled whistles, and remote reading of water level in the boilers. A German soldier rubs down massive shells for the 38 cm SKL-45, or Langer Max rapid-firing railroad gun, circa 1918. The Langer Max was originally designed as a battleship weapon, later mounted to armored rail cars, one of many types of railroad artillery used by both sides during the war. The Langer Max could fire a 750 kilograms, 1,650 pounds, high explosive projectile up to 34,200 meters, 37,400 yards. Electric power turned guns and turrets and raised ammunition from the magazines up to the gun's searchlights, both incandescent and carbon arc, became vital for nighttime navigation, for long-range daytime signaling, and for illuminating enemy ships in night engagements. German infantrymen from Infanterie Regiment Vogel von Falkenstein NR.56 adopt a fighting pose in a communication trench somewhere on the Western Front. Both soldiers are wearing gas masks and Stahlhelm helmets, with brow plate attachments called Sternpanzers. The Sternpanzer was a heavy steel plate used for additional protection for snipers and raiding parties in the trenches, where popping your head above ground for a look could be a lethal move. Chemical warfare first appeared when the Germans used poison gas during a surprise attack in Flanders, Belgium. In 1915 at first, gas was just released from large cylinders and carried by the wind into nearby enemy lines. A British false tree, a type of disguised observation post used by both sides. Later, phosgene and other gases were loaded into artillery shells and shot into enemy trenches. The Germans used this weapon the most, realizing that enemy soldiers wearing gas masks did not fight as well. Turkish troops use a heliograph at Hujj, near Azaz city, in 1917. A heliograph is a wireless solar telegraph that signals by flashes of sunlight, usually using Morse code, reflected by a mirror. All sides used gas frequently. By 1918 its use was a frightening development that caused its victims a great deal of suffering, if not death. An experimental Red Cross vehicle designed to protect the wounded while gathering them from trenches during World War I, circa 1915. The narrow wheels and low clearance would likely make this design ineffective in the chaotic and muddy frontline landscape. The interior of an armored train car, Chaplino, Dnipropetrovska Oblast, Ukraine. In the spring of 1918 at least 9 heavy machine guns are visible, as well as many ammunition cases. U.S. soldiers in trench putting on gas masks. Behind them, a signal rocket appears to be in mid-launch. When gas attacks were detected, alarms used included gongs and signal rockets. Both sides used a variety of big guns on the Western Front, ranging from huge naval guns mounted on railroad cars to short-range trench mortars. The result was a war in which soldiers near the front were seldom safe from artillery bombardment. A disused German trench-digging machine, January 8, 1918. The vast majority of the thousands of miles of trenches were dug by hand, but some had mechanical assistance. The Germans used super long-range artillery to shell Paris from almost 80 miles away. Artillery shell blasts created vast, cratered, moon-like landscapes where beautiful fields and woods had once stood. A German soldier holds the handset of a field telephone to his head as 2 others hold a spool of wire, presumably unspooling it as they head into the field. Perhaps the most significant technological advance during World War I was the improvement of the machine gun, a weapon originally developed by an American, Hiram Maxim. The Germans recognized its military potential and had large numbers ready to use in 1914. Western Front, loading a German A7V tank onto a railroad flat car. Fewer than 100 A7Vs were ever produced, the only tanks manufactured by Germany that they used in the war. German troops did manage to capture and make use of a number of Allied tanks, however. They also developed air-cooled machine guns for airplanes and improved those used on the ground, making them lighter and easier to move. The weapon's full potential was demonstrated on the Somme battlefield in July 1916, when German machine guns killed or wounded almost 60,000 British soldiers in only one day. False horses, camouflaged to allow snipers a place to hide in no man's land. Submarines also became potent weapons, although they had been around for years. It was during World War I that they began fulfilling their potential as a major threat. Women working in the welding department of the Lincoln Motor Company in Detroit, Michigan, circa 1918. Unrestricted submarine warfare, in which German submarines torpedoed ships without warning, even civilian ships belonging to non-combatant nations such as the United States, resulted in the sinking of the Lusitania on 7 May 1915, killing 1,195 people. Finding ways to outfit ships to detect submarines became a major goal for the Allies. A duel between tank and flamethrower on the edge of a village, circa 1918. Researchers determined that Allied ships and submarines could be outfitted with sensitive microphones that could detect engine noise from enemy submarines. These underwater microphones played an important part in combating the submarine threat. Derelict tanks lie strewn about a chaotic battlefield at Clapham Junction, Ypres, Belgium, circa 1918. The Allies also developed sonar, but it came too close to the end of the war to offer much help. The firing stopped on November 11, 1918, but modern war technology had changed the course of civilization. Gas masks in use in Mesopotamia in 1918. Millions had been killed, gassed, maimed, or starved. Famine and disease continued to rage through Central Europe, taking countless lives. Americans setting up a French 37mm gun known as a one-pounder on the parapet of a second-line trench at Diefmich, Alsace, France, where their command, the 126th Infantry, was located on June 26, 1918. Because of rapid technological advances in every area, the nature of warfare had changed forever, affecting soldiers, airmen, sailors, and civilians alike. Photo credit: National Archives, Library of Congress. Official German photograph of World War I. American troops aboard French-built Renault FT-17 tanks head for the front line in the forest of Argonne, France, on September 26, 1918.